Greetings, friends. Welcome to another episode of Badass Unscripted. I have a challenge for you this week, a contemplation of sorts, a prompt. Never bow to fashion, especially in your thinking. There's a habit I'm willing to bet that you've adopted without even noticing. You think without thinking. Isn't that true? How often do we accept what we read, what we see, what we hear in TED Talks, blog posts, books, social media, internet memes, and we accept them as being real and true, to the point where if we're called upon to think for ourselves, to generate our own ideas, more often what we come up with is what we have absorbed and what's gone underneath our skin without our permission, as often as it's an original or novel idea that comes from the space between our ears. And this is a bit of a problem. You see, fashion is supposed to be about expression. But how often is fashion really about fitting in? Fitting in, saying things and doing things that are pleasing to the masses. There's an awful lot of stuckness there. There's so many opportunities that we have to move the needle, to change the conversation, to advance the cause. But we don't take it. We don't leverage it because we would rather say things that are already being said. We'd rather say things in agreement with the noise, with the common chronic conversations that are already out there. This is a bit of a big deal. Look, anything worth doing, worth having, is going to have an element of novelty to it, of strangeness. And those novel ideas are going to encounter resistance. They're going to encounter sometimes strong opposition. But that's exactly when you know that you're doing the right things and saying the right things, because they take us out of our comfort zone. They bring us to that place where we're not certain. Instead, if we focus on the fashionable things, what ends up happening, you may have noticed, is that it constrains what we can do. It constrains what we can say, because we want to make sure that we're conforming to the populist dialogue. We want to make sure that we don't say anything out of turn, something that doesn't conform to the hashtag, something that might draw fire from the people around us. But isn't the joy of creating stuff, whether it's a new product or service for the marketplace, whether it's a new process, whether it's a new philosophy like Agile itself, the joy is in building something new that advances us from where we were yesterday. Nothing remains in fashion for long, does it? Go look in your closet, go through your shirts, your pants, whatever you got. See how many things you bought 5 years ago that are still acceptable to wear today. Collars are a bit too big. Maybe they're spread apart too far. Maybe the tie's got too many dots on it, or the dots are too big, or the colors are all wrong. The point is, nothing changes or evolves until our ideas change. So there's nothing in the word fashion that implies that we've arrived at the pinnacle. We now have the best idea, the right way, and we can just sit on that and ride it out forever. Our job is to constantly be challenging that status quo, to break apart those traditions, to say new things. So if we're still saying the same thing today about our craft that we were saying 5, 10, or 20 years ago, it's time for pause. It's time to examine what we're trying to do with Agile, where we're trying to go with it, and how can this be used to make society better, to make work better, to make life better for people, rather than trying to settle on something that's permanent and lasting that can then be scripted or documented and made repetitive. Fashion should always be pushing the limits, should always be moving the boundaries outward, challenging us to think differently, to try new things. So the moment you catch yourself saying something just because you read it somewhere else, just because somebody else told you that it must be so, is a great opportunity to stop and examine and challenge yourself. Now, this requires that you spend some time in reflection. If we're on autopilot, simply repeating what's fashionable, what's being said everywhere else by the leaders in our community, by the celebrated thinkers, you're never going to create anything new. The only way you create new things is to bravely go out and try things and have them fail. Pin it up against something and say, those colors don't match, they don't belong together, this doesn't look right, this is too retro or not retro enough, or whatever the case may be. The only way to come up with new ideas is to experience, to move boldly, and to be aware. Because awareness is how you notice whether your ideas work, whether they have potential, whether we create better outcomes or worse outcomes, whether this was successful or unsuccessful. But if you're not sitting with your thoughts and creating new things, hypothesizing, imagining, daydreaming, and writing down what you think might move the needle so that you can go and try it tomorrow, then we're not going to get anywhere. Because all we have is this giant echo chamber where people are saying the same things over and over and over. And if they do move, if they do change, something becomes trendy, then that's the new conversation for tomorrow. But do we ever question whether this deserves to be the new trend? Where has this been proven? Where are we making assumptions? Where are we taking things for granted? Where are we failing to challenge convention? See, things often become trends simply because someone likes the look of it and circulates it, shares it, upvotes it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. So just because something does change, becomes a new trend, becomes the new normal, here we have to be careful not to follow those conventions either, but to question, to test, examine, and to demand that the assumptions be proven. That's something to think about. So what can you do this week that moves the needle, that creates not a new trend, but serves to seek truth? What really works? What's really effective? As always, my friends, you can find me at badassagile.com. You can reach me on Twitter at badass_agile or on Instagram at badassagile. Look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, stay badass.